wind howled through the narrow streets of this rotting coastal town as I stood at the edge of the pier, staring at the gray waves crashing against the jagged rocks below. Salt stung my face, and the air reeked of fish guts and diesel-fitting stench for a place that chewed up hope and spat it back out. I'd come here months ago, chasing a rumor of steady work in the shipyards, a chance to claw my way out of the dirt I'd been born into. Back home, in the sun-scorched hills I'd left behind, my sister Mara waited, her letters piling up, each one sharper than the last, demanding money for the kids she was raising alone. I'd promised her a lifeline, but the jobs here were ghosts, vanishing the moment you reached for them. All I'd found was a town drowning in its own despair, where men like me either starved or turned predator. That's when I met Kale. She wasn't like the others here, worn-down women with hollow eyes and hunched shoulders. No, Kale moved through the tavern like a flame, her auburn hair catching the dim lantern light, her laugh cutting through the din of drunken sailors. She served drinks with a sharp tongue and a sharper glare, fending off grabby hands with a flick of her wrist or a well-placed elbow. I'd watched her for weeks, nursing my cheap ale in the corner, mapping the way she worked the room. She was beautiful, sure-high cheekbones, a defiant tilt to her chin butt. It wasn't just that. There was a hunger in her, a restless edge that mirrored my own. I saw opportunity where others saw a woman out of reach. It started small. I'd linger after closing, offering to haul crates or sweep the floors, anything to get her talking. She'd eye me warily, her green gaze slicing through my easy smiles. But she didn't send me packing. "You're persistent," she said one night, leaning against the bar as I stacked chairs. "Most men here give up when I don't bite." I grinned, wiping sweat from my brow. "I'm not most men." That got a smirk out of her, a crack in the armor. Over time, the cracks widened. She told me she'd washed up here after fleeing something back east, though she never gave details. "This place is a dead end," she'd mutter, staring out the grimy window at the endless sea. "But it's better than what I left." I nodded like I understood, filing every word away. The idea hit me one stormy night, as thunder rattled the tavern's thin walls. A Solora burly, red-faced brute with a gold tooth slid a hand up Kyle's skirt while she poured his drink. She smashed the bottle over his head. Glass and blood sprang across the bar. The room erupted, men cheering as she stood over him, chest heaving, her knuckles white. The owner threw her out for the night, cursing her temper. But I saw something else. Power. She wasn't just a barmaid. She was force, untamed and dangerous. And men here, they'd pay for that. Not just with tips or leers, but with real money. The kind I needed. I caught up to her outside, rain plastering her hair to her face as she kicked at the mud. "You all right?" I asked, hands in my pockets. She glared at me, water dripping from her chin. "I don't need your pity." "Not pity," I said, stepping closer. "A proposition." Her brow arched, skepticism etched into every line of her face. But she didn't walk away. I laid it out slow. I'd seen the way men watched her, how they'd line up for a chance if she gave it. "You're wasting yourself slinging drinks," I told her. "We could make real coin, split it even. You do what you're already good at, just on purpose." She stared at me, rain drumming between us, then laughed, had a bitter, cutting sound. "You're a bastard," she said, but there was no heat in it. I shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm a bastard who's broke, and you're a fighter who's stuck. Think about it." She didn't say yes that night, or the next, but I kept at it, planting seeds, casual comments about the money we could send home, the life we could build. I told her about Mara, the kids, the debts piling up like driftwood. "I'm not asking you to care," I'd say, just to see the sense in it. Kel was no fool. She knew the town's underbelly better than I did, the back rooms, the whispered deals. She'd resisted it, she said once, because it made her feel like the past she'd run from. But hunger has a way of bending principles, and I saw it in her eyes, the slow crumble of resolve. It took a month, but she caved. We set rules. No names, no regulars, cash up front. I'd handle the client's dock workers, drifters, anyone with a full pocket and a wandering eye. She'd handle the rest. Our first was a wiry fisherman named Torv, his hands calloused from nets, his breath sharp with gin. I met him behind the tavern, the wind whipping salt into my face. "She's waiting," I said, nodding toward the shack we'd claimed, a crumbling shed near the dunes, its walls patched with tar and driftwood. "Half now, half after." He grinned, slapping coins into my palm, and disappeared into the night. I stayed outside, counting the money, the weight of it steadying my nerves. When he came back an hour later, he was flushed, his shirt untucked. "She's a wild one," he muttered, handing over the rest. "Tell her I'll be back." I nodded, pocketing the cash. A thrill in my gut, it had worked. Kale didn't talk about it after. She'd meet me at dawn, her face blank, and take her cut without a word. I'd watch her count the coins, her fingers steady, and wonder what she felt: anger, shame, nothing at all. I didn't ask. We kept it up, night after night, the shed our silent partner. The money flowed small at first, then steady. I sent most of it home, Mara's letters softening as the funds arrived. "You're saving us," she wrote once, and I clung to that, letting it drown the unease that crept in when I looked at Kale too long. But the town wasn't blind. Whispers spread, sailors trading smirks, women at the market eyeing me with disgust. Kale felt it too. I saw it in the way she stiffened when men lingered at the bar, their stares bolder now. One night, a client, a hulking deckhand with a hard lip, grabbed my arm as he left the shed. "She's worth every damn coin," he said, his voice low. "But you're a cold son of a bitch, ain't you?" I shrugged him off, but his words stuck, burrowing under my skin. Cold, maybe, but alive. That's what mattered. The trouble started with Torv. He'd come back, like he promised, but this time he was drunker, meaner. I took his money anyway, waving him toward the shed. An hour passed, then two. When he didn't show, I went looking. The door hung ajar, creaking in the wind. Inside, Kale sat on the cot, her dress torn at the shoulder, blood smeared across her knuckles. Torv lay sprawled on the floor, his neck twisted at an odd angle, eyes wide and still. "He wouldn't stop," she said, her voice flat, like she was reciting a list. "I hit him. He fell. That's it." I stared at her, then at him, my pulse hammering. Dead. A client dead in our shed. Panic clawed at me, but Kale just stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "We dump him in the sea," she said, calm as the tide. "No one'll care, he's a nobody." I wanted to argue, to run, but her eyes locked on mine, steady and unyielding. We dragged him to the cliffs, the wind masking our grunts, and rolled him over the edge. The waves took him, swallowing him whole. Back at the shed, she scrubbed the floor while I burned his coat in a barrel, the smoke stinging my lungs. "This changes nothing," she said, wringing out the rag. "We keep going." I nodded, but something shifted in me that night, a crack I couldn't name. The next day, no one asked about Torv. He was a drifter. Drifters vanished. But I couldn't shake the image of his body hitting the rocks, or Kyle's hands, steady as she cleaned his blood away. She'd killed him accent in her note, and I'd helped hide it. The money still came, the clients still lined up, but I started watching her closer. There was a hardness in her now, a glint I hadn't seen before. And when the next man, a quiet type, with a limp, went in, and didn't come out for hours, I felt it again. That crack, widening, whispering that I'd unleashed something I couldn't control. I couldn't sleep that night after we dumped Torv into the sea. The wind screeched outside my rented room, a damp, moldy hole above the tavern, carrying the crash of waves that now cradled his corpse. My hands still felt the weight of his body, the way his limp arms flopped as we heaved him over the cliff. Kale's voice looped in my head. "This changes nothing." But it had changed everything. I'd seen her eyes in the shed, cold, unblinking, like the ocean itself, and I couldn't shake the thought that I'd misjudged her. She wasn't just a tool in my scheme. She was something sharper, something I'd woken up without meaning to. I tossed on the thin mattress, the coins in my pocket jingling, a mocking reminder of what I'd traded for this gnawing unease. By morning, the town buzzed with its usual chaos, fishmongers shouting, gulls screeching, the clatter of crates on the docks. No one mentioned Torv. He was a speck in this place, a man who'd drift out of memory as fast as he'd drifted into the tide. I met Kale at the shed, her hair tied back, her face scrubbed clean of last night's blood. She handed me a tin mug of bitter tea, her fingers brushing mine without a tremble. "Next one's tonight," she said, her voice flat as the gray sky above. "A deckhand from the North Pier. Paid double, says he likes it rough." I nodded, swallowing the tea, its burn doing little to thaw the chill in my gut. "You sure about this?" I asked, glancing at the spot where Torv had fallen. She smirked, a quick, jagged thing. "You're the one who wanted this. Don't go soft now." Her words stung, but I let them slide. She was right, I'd started it. No turning back. The deckhand showed up as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sea red. He was a bear of a man broad shoulders, a beard like tangled wire, eyes glinting with a hunger that set my nerves on edge. I took his money twice, Torv's fee, heavy in my palm, and pointed him to the shed. "She's waiting," I said, my throat dry. He grunted, cracking his neck, and lumbered inside. I stayed out, pacing the dunes, the wind whipping sand into my face. An hour passed, then 2. The shed was silent, no screams, no thuds, just the sea's endless roar. My boots sank into the wet sand as I crept closer, unease coiling tighter with every step. I pressed my ear to the wall, the wood rough against my skin. Nothing. Too quiet. Too long. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning like a warning. The air inside hit me first thick with sweat and something metallic, sharp. Kale sat on the cot, her back to me, her shoulders still. The deckhand sprawled at her feet, his massive frame crumpled like a discarded sack, his beard matted with dark, wet streaks. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the cracks of the floorboards. A slow, deliberate spread. I froze, my breath catching as she turned her head, her green eyes locking on mine. "It got loud," she said, her voice low, steady. I fixed it. In her hand a knife gleamed small, curved, the blade slick with red. My stomach lurched. "Fixed it?" I choked out, stepping back. "He's dead, Kale. Another one's dead." She stood, wiping the knife on her skirt, leaving a smear that matched her hair in the dim light. "He wouldn't stop," she said, stepping over him like he was trash. Kept pushing, clawing. I warned him once. She tilted her head, studying me. "You look scared. Didn't think you'd flinch this easy." Her calm sliced through me sharper than the blade. I grabbed her arm, my grip tight. "This isn't a game. 2 men. Kale 2 in a week. People notice." She yanked free, her lip curling. "Notice what?" "Drunks and drifters die here every day, fights. Falls. The sea. No one's coming for us." She bent down, rifling through the deckhand's pockets, pulling out a wad of bills and a tarnished watch. "He paid extra," she said, tossing me the cash. "Might as well keep it." I stared at the money, then at her, my mind racing. She was right, this town swallowed its dead without a blink, but the weight of it pressed on me, a shadow I couldn't shake. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice cracking. "Not like this." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're the one who begged me into it. Said we'd be rich. Now you want out because it's messy?" She stepped closer, the knife still in her hand, her eyes boring into mine. "You don't get to quit. Not after pulling me in. We're tied now, blood and all." Her words landed like a fist, pinning me where I stood. She was a storm I'd unleashed, and I was caught in its eye. We hauled the deckhand out under cover of night, the moon a thin sliver barely lighting the cliffs. His weight dragged at my arms, his blood slicking my hands as we rolled him into the surf. The waves took him fast, a dark shape vanishing beneath the foam. Back at the shed, Kale scrubbed the floor while I burned his coat, the stench of singed wool mixing with the salt air. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, just worked. her movements precise, practiced. I watched her, the question clawing up my throat. How many times has she done this before? I didn't ask. Couldn't. The answer hung between us, heavy as the knife she'd tucked back under the cot. The next few days blurred into a tense rhythm. Clients came fewer now, word of missing men rippling through the docks like a shiver. I took their money, sent them in, waited outside with my heart hammering. Most came out alive, grinning, tossing me their coins. But Kale's edge grew sharper. She'd meet me at dawn, her cut in hand, her gaze distant, like she was somewhere else. Once, I caught her staring at the sea, the knife twirling in her fingers, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't look at me. "Just thinking," she said. "How easy it gets." My blood ran cold, but I didn't press. I couldn't afford to. Then came the stranger. He showed up at dusk, a lean figure in a long coat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His voice was low, clipped, not like the slurred drawl of the locals. "Heard you've got a girl," he said, his eyes flicking to the shed. "Special. I want in." I hesitated. Something about him felt off. Too clean for this filth, but his money shone in the fading light, more than I'd seen in weeks. "She's inside," I said, pocketing the coins. "Don't linger." He nodded and slipped through the door, silent as a ghost. I waited, the wind biting at my neck, my gut twisting tighter with every minute. Hours passed 3, then 4. No sound, no movement. The shed crouched in the dark, a mute witness to whatever was unfolding inside. I couldn't stand it. I crept to the door, my breath shallow, and eased it open. The air hit me stale, heavy, laced with that same metallic tang. Kale stood over the cot, her back to me. The stranger sprawled at her feet. Blood soaked the floor, a dark mirror reflecting the lantern's weak glow. His hat lay crumpled beside him, his throat slashed ear to ear, a grin frozen on his lifeless face. Kale turned, the knife dripping in her hand, her eyes wild not with fear, but with something fiercer, something alive. "He knew me," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "From before. He came to finish it." I staggered back, my mind reeling. "Finish what?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. She stepped closer, the knife glinting between us, her smile gone. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she said, her words slow, deliberate. "You never ask why I ran, why I'm here." She lifted the blade, pointing it at my chest, her gaze burning. "He was one of them, the men I left behind, hunters. And now you've brought them to me." My heart stopped as her words sank in. The shed shrinking around us, the sea's roar, a distant scream. She wasn't just a killer. She was a fugitive, and I'd made her a target. The shed felt like a tomb, as Kale's words hung in the air. Her knife hovering between us, its bloody tip catching the lantern's flicker. "Hunters," she'd said, her voice a razor's edge slicing through the haze of my panic. The stranger's body lay at her feet, his slashed throat a grotesque smile, his lifeless eyes staring into nothing. I stumbled back, the door banging against the wall as the wind roared outside, a howl that matched the storm in my chest. "What the hell are you talking about?" I rasped, my hands shaking. "Who was he? Who are you?" She stepped over the corpse, her boots leaving red prints on the floor, her gaze pinning me like a blade to a board. "You thought I was your pawn," she said, her lips curling into a bitter sneer. "But you don't even know the game." I wanted to run, to bolt into the night, and leave this cursed town behind. But her eyes wild, blazing, held me fast. "He was one of them," she said, kicking the stranger's leg, her voice dropping low. "Men who owned me once, back east, before I clawed my way out. They don't forgive runaways." She twirled the knife, a dancer with her partner, and I saw it now, the precision in her grip, the way she killed Torv, the deckhand, and this man without a flinch. It wasn't rage or accident, it was skill. "Hunters?" I echoed, my throat dry. "What does that mean?" She laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. "It means I'm not the prey you thought." They trained me, made me their weapon, until I turned it on them. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments she dropped over months, the vague mentions of East, her scars I'd glimpsed under her sleeves, the way she'd flinched at loud knocks. She wasn't just a barmaid running from a bad past. She was a fugitive from something darker, something that had forged her into this whatever this was. You're saying he tracked you here? I asked, my voice cracking. Because of me? She stepped closer, the knife brushing my coat, her breath hot against my face. You brought men to me night after night, she hissed. Word spreads. They'd been sniffing my trail for years, and you lit the damn beacon. Her words landed like a punch, guilt and fear twisting in my gut. I'd sold her, yes, but I hadn't known not this. We need to leave, I said, grabbing her arm. If he found you, others will too. She yanked free, her eyes narrowing. Leave? This is my stand. I'm done running. She turned, dragging the stranger's body toward the corner, her strength unnerving. Help me, or get out, she snapped. I hesitated, then grabbed his legs, the slick warmth of his blood coating my hands. We hauled him to the cliffs again, the wind screaming as we tossed him into the churning sea. The waves devoured him, just like the others, but this time felt different, heavier, final. Back at the shed, Kale scrubbed the floor, her movements fierce, while I stood there, useless, my mind a tangle of dread. You don't get it, do you? She said, wringing the rag, red water dripping into a bucket. They'll keep coming. One dies, another takes his place. I've killed 6 now, 3 before you, 3 with you. It's never enough. I stared at her, the number sinking in. 6. She'd been a killer long before I met her, and I'd been blind, too greedy to see. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, my voice rising. I could have protected you. She laughed again, colder this time. Protected me? You sold me to them, you bastard. You're no different, just another man taking what he wants. Her words hit harder than fists, stripping away the lies I'd told myself that this was for Mara, for the kids, for survival. It was for me. Always me. The next night, I couldn't face her. I stayed in my room, the money from the stranger burning a hole in my pocket, my head pounding with guilt and fear. I'd turned Kale into a target, a lure from monsters I didn't understand. Sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the floorboards was a hunter's step, every gust of wind their whisper. At dawn, a knock jolted me upright, a sharp, deliberate rap. I opened the door to find a man I didn't know, tall and gaunt, his coat pristine despite the town's filth. You the fixer? He asked, his voice smooth, too polished. My stomach dropped. What do you want? I muttered. He smiled thin and predatory. Her. I know she's here. Name your price. I slammed the door, my heart racing, but his laughter seeped through the wood. You can't hide her forever. I ran to the shed, bursting in as Kale sharpened her knife on a whetstone, the scrape of metal filling the air. They're here, I panted. Another one knows you're with me. She didn't flinch, just kept sharpening, the sound steady as a heartbeat. Told you, she said. They don't stop. I grabbed her shoulders, desperate. We can fight together. I'll help you end this. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, then softened just a flicker. You're a fool, she murmured, but she didn't pull away. We planned fast. I'd lure him in. She'd strike. No more running. No more bodies in the sea, just to stand, here and now. He came at dusk, his coat flapping like wings as he approached the shed. I met him outside, playing the part. She's inside, I said, my voice steady despite the sweat on my palms. All yours. He nodded, stepping past me, and I followed, silent, my hand on the crowbar I'd tucked in my belt. The door shut behind us, and Kale moved like lightning, her knife flashing as she lunged. But he was faster, catching her wrist, twisting it until the blade clattered to the floor. She snarled, clawing at him, but he slammed her against the wall, his strength terrifying. You've gotten sloppy, he said, his voice dripping with menace. They want you back alive, but I'll break you first. I swung the crowbar, aiming for his skull, but he ducked, spinning to face me. His fist caught my jaw, sending me sprawling, stars bursting in my vision. Cale kicked his knee, and he staggered, giving me time to scramble up. We fought like animals' grunts, blood, the crack of bone butt he was trained, relentless, driving us back. Then Cale grabbed the knife, diving low, and sank it into his thigh. He roared, stumbling, and I smashed the crowbar into his temple. He dropped, twitching, then still. We stood there, panting, blood pooling around him, our breaths ragged in the silence. She turned to me, her face bruised, her eyes blazing. "That's the last," she said, wiping the blade. "They'll send more, but I'm free for now." I nodded, the weight of it crashing down. I'd wanted money, power, a way out. Instead, I'd chained myself to a war I'd fueled. That night she left, vanishing into the dark without a word, leaving me with the shed, the bodies, the guilt. I burned it all, the shack, the clothes, the money, watching the flames eat my sins. I fled the town at dawn, the sea at my back, her shadow in my mind. Weeks later, back home, Mara met me at the door, her face pale. "The kids," she whispered, tears spilling. "Someone took them days ago, left a note, 'You owe us.'" My knees buckled, the truth clawing through me. The hunters hadn't stopped, they'd followed me. Struck where it hurt most. Cale's fight had become mine, her blood on my hands now staining my family. I'd sold her, yes, but I'd sold myself too into a debt I could pay. Now I sit here, staring at the ashes of my life, wondering if I damned us all. Do you think I could have stopped Eider? Was this always my fate?